I met Bono years ago in the cigar room of a bar in London with Quincy Jones and Bobby Schreiber. I'd spent most of the night quizzing Quincy about Thriller, the greatest album ever made. Quincy graciously answered all of my detailed questions, questions he probably asked 4 times a week, and then gave me a history lesson about his days as a jazz musician, telling stories about touring Europe in the 50s and 60s with Dizzy and Miles and Ray Charles. Bono was beaming and laughing the whole time. I liked him right away. I knew who he was, of course, as a musician and philanthropist and human rights activist. I knew U2's hit like everyone else on the planet. But I was completely unprepared for what a genuine, humble, and open person he is. Bono got such a pure soul and positive energy. His eyes almost literally light up and dance when he's excited. He's one of those people who always seem hungry for new information and experiences, and then impatiently generous to share the things he's consumed. After Quincy talked for more than an hour, Bono pulled out a song U2 had recorded earlier in the day. I was traveling with one of those boom boxes that are built into backpacks, the ones skateboarders use, and at 3 in the morning in that cigar room, Bono played his new song for us on that box, eager to hear what we thought, including me, even though he'd never met me before. Later, when he heard me tell Quincy I was going to meet some friends in the morning and head to the south of France for the first time, he offered to fly me to Nice in his plane. I didn't tell him just how many friends I was traveling with, which was a lot, too many for his plane, but I really didn't want to impose anyway. We became friends after that night. Years later, we both became investors in the restaurant in New York, the Spotted Pig in Greenwich Village. One night I ran into him there, and he told me he'd read the interview I'd done somewhere. The writer had asked me about the U2 record that was about to be released, and I said something about the kind of pressure a group like that must be under just to meet their own standard. Bono told me that my quote had really gotten to him. In fact, he said it got him a little anxious. He decided to go back to the studio even though the album was already done and keep reworking it till he thought it was good as it could possibly be. I really wasn't trying to make him nervous with that quote, and I was surprised to find out that at this point in his career, he still got anxious about his work. What I thought I was doing was expressing sympathy. Here he is, Bono, star, master musician, world diplomat, philanthropist, all of that. It was only right that I met him and Quincy Jones on the same night. They're both already in the pantheon. I tried to explain all of that to him, and we ended up trading stories about the pressure we felt. Even at this point in our lives, I explained how I've always believed there's a real difference between rock and hip hop in terms of how the artists relate to each other. In hip hop, top artists have the same pressures a rock star like Bono has, the pressure to meet expectations and stay on top. But in hip hop, there's an added degree of difficulty. While you're trying to stay on top by making great music, there are dozens of rappers who don't just compete with you by putting out their own music, but they're trying to pull you down at the same time. It's like trying to win a race with every runner behind you trying to tackle you. It's really not personal, at least it shouldn't be. It's just the nature of rap. Hip hop is a perfect mix between poetry and boxing. Of course, most artists are competitive, but hip hop is the only art that I know that's built on direct confrontation. Take your last 2 deep breaths and pass the mic. There are rap groups, of course, but one thing you'll hardly ever find in hip hop is rappers harmonizing on the mic. The rule is one person on the mic at a time, and you have to earn the right to get on the mic. No one just passes you a mic because you happen to be standing there. In the earliest days of hip hop, MCs had to prove themselves to DJs before they could rock a party. The competition grew from there. After a while, it wasn't just about who could rock the party or the park or the rec center, it was about who could rep the hood, the borough, the city. Then, when people started getting record deals, the battle exploded again, but now they were over national dominance and sales. Sales battles are a hip hop phenomenon that you just don't see played out in the same explicit public way in other genres of music. Rappers can be like gambling addicts who see a potential bet everywhere they look. Everywhere we look, we see competition. A couple years back, when I was still running Def Jam, 50 Cent challenged Kanye West to a battle over who would get the biggest first week sales numbers. This was when 50's Curtis album and Kanye's Graduation was scheduled to come out the same day. The whole thing was fun and useful marketing, and Ye won by close to 300,000 units. But it was also kind of strange to watch people, regular fans, get so caught up in this battle over numbers, only in hip hop. I'm not complaining. I love the competition, even the sales battles. Before the Kanye situation, I had my own relatively low key battle with 50 Cent. When I was about to release the Black album, we had to push up the release date to get the jump on the bootleggers, which put us into the same initial sales week as Big Beg for Mercy, the first album from 50's crew, G Unit. 50, in his showman style, got on the radio and announced that he was putting money on Beg for Mercy outselling the Black album. This was the same year that 50's first album, Get Rich or Die Trying, had an incredible run, including huge first week numbers. Kevin Liles at Def Jam called me asking if I wanted to push the date back a couple of weeks to give 50's album and some other high profile releases that week a chance to breathe. I love Kevin. He's one of the nicest people you ever meet. But I told him to put my shit out as planned. The Black Album debuted at number one. Beg for Mercy was third. The soundtrack to Resurrection, the Tupac documentary, was the number two album on the chart. There was something beautiful about Pac being my closest competition on the charts that week. Aside from the heartbreak of losing two great MCs and one great friend, I've always felt robbed of my chances to compete with Tupac and Biggie, in the best sense, if not just for first week sales numbers. Competition pushes you to become your best self, and in the end, it tells you where you stand. Jordan said the same thing about Larry Bird and Magic. He spent his whole career at North Carolina wanting to have the chance to play with them. And by the time Jordan and the Bulls were really coming into their own, Bird and Magic both retired. But there's a risk in this kind of indirect, non musical battling. The spectacle of competition can overshadow the substance of the work. That's when the boxing analogy breaks down, and the more accurate comparison becomes professional wrestling, an arena where the showmanship is more important than actual skill or authentic competition. I'm not a professional wrestler. Rappers who use beef as a marketing plan might get some quick press, but they're missing the point. Battles are always meant to test skill in the truest tradition of the culture. Just like boxing takes the most primal type of competition and transforms it into a sport. Battling in hip hop took a very real competitive energies on the street, the kind of thing that could end in some real life and death shit and transform them into art. That competitive spirit that we learned growing up in the streets was never just for play and theater. It was real. That desire to compete and to win was the engine of everything we did. And we learned how to compete the hard way. Knock a nigga off his feet, but I crawled back. When I was 16 years old, my friend Hill and I set up shop in Trenton, hustling, literally, on a dead end street. There were a couple of areas close by where other hustlers were working, in front of the grocery store, in front of a club on the main strip, out in the park. So we competed on price because we were getting our supply at lower numbers. We started making some money and we were styling too. Brand new Ewins, new gear that wasn't even sold in Jersey yet. The local girls were loving us. Hill enrolled in high school just to fuck with the girls. My dumbass went up to meet him one day at the end of school and I got arrested by the school cop for trespassing. I had crack in my pockets, but since it was my first arrest, I had no prior offenses. They released me on my own recognizance and sealed it once I turned 18. But the damage was done. They confiscated the work I was holding. That combined with a series of other setbacks, and suddenly we were in a hole. I went back to Brooklyn stressed. I needed to make some money fast to cover the loss. A kid from Marcy owed me money, so I went out with him on the streets and worked for 60 straight hours. I would give him work to sell, wait while he turned it around, then take that money uptown to cop more work. I kept him working 3 nights in a row. His girl bought him sandwiches in the middle of the night. I stayed awake by eating cookies and writing rhymes on the back of the brown paper bags. Once I'd recovered my money, we headed back to Trenton. When we got back, we worked even harder, determined to never be in a position where a loss would set us that far back. Meanwhile, kids in Trenton were really starting to hurt from the drop in prices we'd forced on them. Word got back to us that we weren't welcome in the park. This one kid, a boxer with a missing tooth, got into a hand to hand fight with Hill when he walked through the park anyway. We weren't going to let some dudes in the park shut us down. It was like playground beef all over again, except niggas were damn near grown men and holding. So, how did we react to the scrap? We went to the park and confronted these cats at 4 in the afternoon, both sides armed and ready to shoot it out. We faced off and guns were drawn, but luckily nobody got shot. We did get respect. It was stupid and stressful, but we felt we didn't really have a choice. It was win or go home. Had a dream, I said. You hear rappers talk a lot about winning, about being number one and taking out whoever's on top. There are very few beta rappers. It's alphas all the way. Even in rap groups or crews where you think there's an obvious leader, believe me, the other dude thinks he should be on top. Even the weed carrier thinks he could be a top guy. This is another way the streets bled into and shaped hip hop. What's the basic motivation for a hustler? I hit the streets for the same reason a lot of other kids do. I wanted money and excitement and loved the idea of cutting myself loose from the rules and low ceilings of the straight world. The truth is that most kids on the corner aren't making big money, especially if you break their incomes down to an hourly wage, but they're getting rewarded in ways that go beyond dollars and cents. The kid on the streets is getting a shot at a dream. The dream is that he will be the one to make this hustling thing pay off in a big way. He sees the guy who gets rich and drives the nice car and thinks, yep, that'll be me. He ignores the other stories going around about dudes who get shot or beaten to death with bricks and chains. The young guy in a wheelchair for life. The nigga out of state who never came home. The nigga upstate who'll never come home. But they're working that corner for more than whatever small cut they get of the crack they sell. They're working because they think they're due for a miracle. The kid in McDonald's gets a check and that's it. There's no dream in fast food. Manager? That's a promotion, not a dream. It took me a long time to realize how much courage it took to work in McDonald's, to walk through the streets past rows of hustlers wearing that orange uniform. But at the time, it seemed like an act of surrender to the world that hated us. I never even considered it as a possibility. When you've got a nation of hustlers working for a small handful of slots, you learn something that you'll never learn at McDonald's. You learn to compete hard, even when you lose, because you can't settle for second best as a hustler. It's not worth it. There's no pension and benefits for a scrambler. On the other hand, you might get killed. The only reason to do it is for the top slot, for the number one position. If if not just for you, then for you and your crew. If you got the heart and the brains, you can move up quickly and start making enough money to break some off to your mom's or your girl a taste. And the ultimate dream seems even closer, worth more and more risks. There's no way to quantify all that on a spreadsheet, but it's that dream of being the exception, the one who gets rich and gets out before he gets got. That's the key to a hustler's motivation. Legions of young cats chase after the ghost and die in the streets, so a small handful of bosses, the ones who really did catch the miracle, can get richer. Sort of like the music business. Because I ain't sold them a dream, I just showed them the cream. When I was working out of state, every time I came home to New York, I'd link with JayZ. We'd go back and forth to each other's houses and write rhymes for hours. We'd lock ourselves in a room with a pen and a pad and some Apple Jacks and Haagen-Dazs. We were coming up with new flows, improving our speed, delivery, and composition. One day in Jersey, I got the call I had secretly been hoping for. JayZ got a record deal. EMI advanced him a ridiculous amount of money, nearly half a million. That was huge back then for rappers. That was R&B money. EMI was treating jazz like the OJs, but only because they didn't know any better. They didn't know record labels were signing rappers for cars. The A&R department had convinced JayZ to work with Brian Chuck New, a producer who was riding on the success of The Fresh Prince. The label rented JayZ a flat in London to work with Chuck and record his debut. JayZ invited me along for the ride. Inside, I was doing backflips and shit. But when I told my crew, they didn't share my excitement. They thought I was bugging for leaving the block at a time when we were doing so well. These rappers are hoes, was the general response. They just record, tour, and get separated from their families while some white person takes all their money. But it didn't matter to me. JayZ's money was real. I respected that. And even though I didn't go around talking about it to even my closest friends, I believed I could make it as a rapper too. Up until that point, my life could be mapped with a triangle: Brooklyn, Washington Heights, Trenton. So everything about the trip to London, about going to Rockefeller Center to get my passport, packing for a month-long trip, preparing for a transatlantic flight, was new for me. It was a surreal, disorienting experience. Two niggas from Marcy in a flat in Notting Hill. But it was fun too. Once we got out there, I linked up with Moni Love, a cutie, and a dope MC who recorded with De La. She'd come through and take us to clubs and to the movies. Irv Gotti was out there too, DJing for us for a time. I wasn't really doing anything musical in London, but I was like a sponge when I'd sit in on JayZ's recording sessions and meetings. I never gave my opinion about how his business was being run. I was new, and I didn't necessarily know how things worked in the music business. I did notice that even though we were in London more than a month, when the A&R guys from EMI finished JayZ's album, it didn't sound that different than his demo. The only new track they gave him was Hawaiian Sophie, a poppy song with the ukulele on the hook. That wasn't a song JayZ would have come up with on his own, but we were looking at the plaques on their wall and thinking about the radio play they got Will Smith, and we let them convince us that Hawaiian Sophie was going to make this nigga blow. When we shot the video, we were crazy excited. We were wearing Bermuda shirts and leis, rhyming on a soundstage with sand and palm trees. It looked like a bad joke now, but back then it felt like we were shooting an action movie. Unfortunately, it didn't read that way once the video came out. That single was nearly career suicide for JayZ. He went from being courted at the highest level to not having EMI return his phone calls. The wildest shit about the whole thing was that the executives at EMI and Capitol who'd withdrawn support for JayZ's project were coming to me behind his back trying to holler at me on some solo shit. I thought to myself, this business sucks. No honor, no integrity. It was disgusting. In some ways, it was worse than the streets. JayZ's debut album, something he'd been dreaming about his whole life, did come out, but in the end, it was nothing more than a tax write off for the giant corporation.